Nothing is more respectable than the Pennsylvania Quaker. A veritable pillar of society. But the laws of the United States about religious freedom were designed for just such people as Quakers. They were individualists. They were far out. And yet today, when you claim in court that you object conscientiously to war, or that you have some peculiar religion with very odd sacraments, they say to you, what church do you belong to that authorizes this? How well established is it? How many members does it have? Can you prove that you were brought up by your parents in this way of life? Because these are the tests of whether your grounds for claiming that you are doing a thing as a matter of religious conscience. This is the test for whether you're valid. And thus you're in a frightful double bind. Because if you are accused in court of what is generally regarded to be a heinous felony, you know your chances of getting a light sentence are much better if you take a guilty attitude. You plead guilty. You say, I'm so sorry, it was a grievous mistake. I didn't mean to do it. Please forgive me, dear God. You know your chances are better. But if you say, I insist that I did this as a religious act, it is in accord with my conscience, and I am not guilty, the judge will say, your attitude is truculent, and he won't like you, and you're liable to get a more severe sentence. For this story is as old as the hills. It's been going on, and we never learn from history. We do the same things over and over again. For example, we all have the horrors about the Spanish Inquisition and how they took Protestants and put them on the rack and with thumbscrew and finally burned them at the stake. And we say, oh, we don't do things like that anymore. Oh, we don't? I invite you to consider mental hospitals. The new heresy is not oddball religious opinions, because nobody takes that seriously anymore. The new heresy is oddball states of consciousness. And if you have an odd state of consciousness, and you try to express it to your family, they start looking at you in a funny way and say, are you feeling all right? And that's a terrible thing to say to anyone. You know, if you want to, I shouldn't really tell anyone this, but if you want to really bug someone and put a hex on them, all you do is you look at them in a funny way and say, are you feeling well today? And they says, yes, I'm feeling fine. Oh, I just thought you were a bit pale. And soon the person will begin feeling all kinds of squeamishness. And it's much worse when you question a person's state of mind, because it's very easy to test a bodily state. You can take your temperature, pulse, have a urinalysis or something, and the doctor says, there's nothing the matter with you. It sounds a stethoscope on your lungs. You're all right. But when it comes to your mind, everything's very vague. You can get into the most weird, Kafkaesque situations about whether you're sane or not. The moment you're challenged to prove that you're sane, you're on your guard. And immediately the psychiatrist says, why are you so defensive? Psychiatry is completely diabolic. There's almost, the more I see of it, the less I think there's any good to be said for it. It is a way of bugging people. If you arrive for your appointment early, you're defined as anxious. If you arrive late, you're defined as hostile. If you're happy, you're euphoric. If you're not happy, you're melancholic. If you're afraid of something, you're paranoid. Every conceivable way is devised of putting the patient down. And when you're admitted to a mental hospital, You may know all this, but you ought to know the law about these things, how it stands. You can be so easily put in a mental hospital, although the only salvation is that the mental hospitals in California today are so crowded and so understaffed that they're not wishing to admit anyone. And you really have to be in a state of a screaming meanness to get in, or somebody has to dislike you very much. But you are deprived of all civil rights. You are no longer considered as a person. You are depersonified in a negative sense. See, there's a higher depersonification when you attain the mystical realization and become one with the Absolute. And there is, on the other hand, a lower depersonification where you are simply an outcast. This has been true always. In India, there were the higher outcasts called the sannyasins, the holy men, who renounced caste and lived the life of poverty and freedom. But there were the untouchables on the other end, who were the aborigines, like the Eta in Japan. And so if you go to a mental hospital, you become a lower outcast. You are no longer human. And you get frightened, you get scared out of your wits because you suddenly begin to realize that you cannot communicate with people. Because they look at you in a funny way about everything you say. Say, I wonder what he meant by that. And you get real scared. And so you start to act in a funny way, which is the whole thing, the diagnosis of, say, schizophrenia is a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. Because when anybody puts you in that position and makes you the patsy, you can't help acting in an odd way. If you say, now look everybody, you're putting a thing over on me. I'm perfectly sane. They say, why are you so insisting on it? They think thou dost protest too much. It's a very difficult situation to be in. Never send anyone to an insane asylum. Do anything but that. Anything. Because that's the trap they get in. And then, of course, because they're understaffed, you're ignored. They really don't have time to get around you. I know what the problems are. And even very conscientious psychiatrists in insane asylums just can't get the work done. So how do you get attention? Well, you start being difficult in the expectation that this will draw attention to you and you'll get some therapy. And that doesn't really work. I'll tell you how to get out of an insane asylum in a minute. But the thing is that you try to get attention until they construe all the things you do to get attention as being further signs of insanity, of lack of cooperation. Finally, they throw you in a cell where there's nothing left to you but to take shit and throw it at the walls in order to get some kind of attention. And they see how far gone he is. Now, the way to get out of an insane asylum is very subtly to flatter one of the psychiatrists and cooperate with him to the utmost, not too quickly, but in a sort of gradual way so as to give him the impression that his method of treatment is working in your case. Because he wants to write a paper and publish it in a psychiatric journal showing that a certain method, a certain technique is really good. And you will cooperate with that idea, and you'll do everything he tells you, but just in the right, with a certain little subtle resistance to him. See? He'll immediately spot you as someone who's playing funny business if you cooperate completely, you see. Don't do that. But just gently let it be understood that his therapy is working and they'll release him. Unless, of course, you want to go to an insane asylum just so as to have no responsibility and just get out of the whole mess. I think there are some people who do that. But you see what we've got here in this situation is that having a different state of consciousness, or because you experience differently from other people, that's heresy. And that makes everybody else terribly uncomfortable. And so in you go. And then, you see, now, this isn't all. They say, well, this is pretty desperate. Golly, what are we going to do to help this person? You know, in all the kindness of their hearts, what are we going to do? Well, you can see the inquisitors thinking this problem over too. This heretic. Do you realize that he's going to be tortured forever and ever and ever because of his beliefs? And they're infectious, they spread, they go to other people who will be tortured in hell forever and ever and ever because of what they believe. What are we going to do? We'll reason with them and they don't respond to reason. Well, let's apply a thumbscrew or something, you know, and let's see if that will just make the difference. No? This very stubborn patient. Well, it's a last resort, but we could burn them. Because they might, under the torture of being burned, repent, and therefore escape everlasting damnation. And they did it with the kindest motivation. Burned up the heretics. So in the same way, in a modern mental hospital, they say, well, we'll try shock treatment. And you know, nothing is more unbelievably clumsy. It works occasionally because the patient realizes that he'd better get out at all costs. But by and large, it doesn't. And it is a form of torture. And if that doesn't work, well, they say the only thing is to scrape out the front part of his brain. And you know, they put an ice pick through the alongside the eyeball and get it into the front part of the brain, and they stir it up. It's called a prefrontal lobotomy. And then the person is a happy moron for the rest of his life. But it's the same situation all over again. And we have above all to watch out in this country for this kind of psychiatric fascism. Very, very dangerous. And the problem about the political problem today is that the right wing in this country is very mixed up. They're very opposed to official mental health programs and all that kind of thing. And they have some good reasons for it. They've also some very bad reasons, because they would send them to jail pronto. The right wing are also have a lot of opposition to taxation and centralized government, which is a kind of beginning of anarchism. But they don't mean that. They mean, let's have centralized government against the people we don't like. Leave us alone. Tax everybody else, but not us. Wisdom of insecurity for others. So, here is then a situation in which, A, for the reasons that I've outlined, Western religion definitely ignores or positively excludes the mystical experience. And B, religion plus law persecute those who are uncool about having mystical experience. So this double situation has created in the course of history an alarming practical situation, which is that Western man, in charge of his tremendous technology, is using it against life because he doesn't feel that he belongs in the universe. by being identified as an ego, called into being out of nothing, and feeling therefore that he comes into this world instead of flowering out of it, he is basically against the world. Especially since the death of God in the 19th century, where the new doctrine that follows the authoritarian God the Father is that the universe is a mindless mechanism. And therefore we have to fight it. And therefore in any war, the war against nature, there's naturally commander-in-chief, chain of command, so on, and the whole monarchical situation starts over again. So, as a result of that then, we are using our technology in an absolutely weird way. This goes, of course, into economic problems as well. You see, since the Industrial Revolution, it has been possible, increasingly possible, with greater rapidity, to feed and clothe and adequately house every single person on earth. There's no technical obstacle to that whatsoever. And, but you've got to do it by automation, to do enough of it. But when you automate things, you put people out of work. So if they're out of work, they don't have any money. And so they can't buy what the machines produce. So you have huge surpluses begin to pile up. Well, you can't give them away. Well, what would happen, you see, if you said, well, let's pay the people for the work the machines do? Well, so that would be going into debt. Where's the money going to come from? Well, money is originally based on gold. And this is real hocus pocus, because supposing that gold is rather rare and you can't always find a new gold mine, but yet you're producing millions of tons of butter, milk, wheat, iron, wood, everything you could possibly need. We've got to wait to find a gold mine to get all this stuff into circulation. So the only thing they can do is this. People only go into debt in an emergency. So we increase the national debt and therefore circulate more and more purchasing power to keep the economy running by having wars. There's a perpetual state of emergency. The government has to go into debt because we're threatened by the communists, by the whatever, Chinese, Vietnamese, anything, anybody. Just so long as we can say there's an emergency, therefore we can go into debt. But actually going into debt is gobbledygook semantically. All you're doing is you're issuing credit based on the actual productive wealth of the nation, or whatever community is the unit. But people don't understand that, just as several hundred years ago they couldn't possibly understand that the earth was round, and that if you lived in the Antipodes you wouldn't fall off. And so there's a similar mumbo-jumbo and hocus-pocus about money. Money is a measure of wealth, like inches or pounds or grams. And when you discover a load of iron ore, you don't have to go and borrow 1,000 tons from someone before you can do anything with it. So, in this way then, the culture is so absorbed with verbiage, with doctrines in religion, with money in economics, with status in politics, and with all kinds of manipulation of symbols, that we are not in contact in an aware way with the physical world. We are alienated from the physical world. We are fighting it. We are fighting our own bodies. And so, therefore, imaginative young people become aware of this and see the disaster all around them, the terrifying depredations of nature. They see it growing and growing. They see the final achievement of great Western physics as the hydrogen bomb. And they say it's high time for us to get back to reality. And therefore, naturally, they are accused of peddling hallucinations. But who is under a hallucination? Look at it. Recently, Congress passed very strict laws against burning the American flag. And they did it with great fervor and all sorts of patriotic speeches and this, that, and the other. While they are, by acts of commission or omission, they are burning up the country for which the flag stands, allowing continued pollution of the atmosphere, of the water, ravaging of the forests, destruction of wildlife on a fantastic scale. Oh, yes, that doesn't matter. You can tear the physical territory to pieces, just so long as you don't burn the flag.